I think the Secretary General recognized how important energy was for achieving all of the other SDGs. And I think he called it the golden thread that connects, I think, economic development, climate, and prosperity. I might have paraphrased that a little bit, but essentially just recognizing the importance of energy for achieving everything else, and setting up this organization to really just focus on helping us achieve SDG 7, which calls for universal access to clean and affordable energy for all by 20 by 2030, which is the deadline for the SDGs. So that's essentially, what we focus on. And these days, initially the organization was set up to drive a lot of advocacy. Because I think when the SDGs were first defined, there was a very important role to play around just getting all of the key stakeholders aware of the SDGs and what they meant and how important they were and how they all came together. But I think over the years, we have evolved into what we're now calling SE for All 3.0, which balances that advocacy work with implementation on ground, which then looks like, providing technical assistance to countries to help define plans based on data, deploying some capital that we raise ourselves to de-risk investments and crowd in the private sector, building capabilities on ground. And also, a lot of the work I do myself or I lead at SE for All, just making sure youth are a firm part of, this conversation as we start to raise the profile of energy access in the transition. So that's essentially what SE for All does. And we've been very privileged to partner to date with a lot of you on the call. I think World Bank is a key partner for us, but I think Student Energy as well, alongside the SDG 7 Youth Constituency, I'll say is our most important youth partner, just recognizing the reach they have across the globe. So that's what I would say about SE for All, but happy to answer any other questions you have, and thanks again for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you very much. Before I just give the floor to Namita, I see that you have joined. I just wanted perhaps, because you have mentioned the technical assistance that you provide to the countries, and before the introduction of Namita as well, I think that it would be good to highlight a little bit more on what exactly this technical assistance looks like, because many of the colleagues that have joined this call today may be interested on your services, and we will be grateful if you could provide a little bit more information on that. And with that, I pass the floor to Namita, who will moderate and continue the moderation of this meeting. Thank you.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for that.
Go ahead, Ugo, please.
Thank you very much, Namita. I'll try to be brief. I think essentially the first thing I'll flag is in terms of how we provide technical assistance, we like to make sure it's needs-based and it's really driven by what the country has asked for. And so what we've done on our end to be ready to respond in a case where a country asks is basically define a suite of programs on our end that can provide support to the government across the various areas of the value chain. And when I say value chain, I'm thinking about, starting from policies and regulations. So we have a team called, the Policy and Regulatory Framework team, whose job is essentially to come in, help governments think about, off-grid policies, on-grid policies, regulations that will be very critical for creating an enabling environment for the private sector to thrive. I think beyond just that as well, in terms of supporting the government themselves, we also have the integrated energy planning team, which essentially helps governments then come up with those integrated energy plans. And when I say integrated energy plans, I'm talking about plans that do not just look at electrification, but look at electrification, clean cooking, energy efficiency, productive uses as well, and how all of these pieces come together in a way that is most cost effective for the government to achieve SDG 7. So I'd look at those as, the way we support governments on policies and plans. I think obviously as we start to move closer towards implementation, the role of the private sector becomes even more important. And so one of the programs we have, for example, is called our Universal Energy Facility, which is essentially a results-based grant, that aims to create, aims to make projects more commercially viable for the private sector. And the way it works is, as opposed to in the past where governments have done these large procurements and gotten developers to come implement solutions on ground that, many times are hit or miss. This is results-based financing such that, as you make a connection, then you get reimbursed the subsidy and ticks the box. And so we found that very effective in several markets, especially across Africa. We also have our clean cooking team, again, which helps, countries think about how do you approach the challenge of clean cooking? Because I think we're still far behind on electrification with, almost 800 million people electrified. But I think on clean cooking, the figure is even almost 3 times that. I think about 2 point something billion, which is about a third of the world And so I think there's still a lot that the world is trying to understand in terms of how to grapple the clean cooking challenge. And so our team is able to support there. I mean, just being conscious of time, I imagine there are a few others that I've left, but I think the big message is we've tried to come up with a suite of programs on our end across the value chain. And so basically, we've made ourselves nimble enough to adapt to countries' needs as they need our support. Obviously, there's a lot of other work we do around, improving gender outcomes on ground. I also spoke about the work we're doing with youth, with Helen's team at Student Energy, and some of our other key partners like the SDG7 Youth Constituency. But I think, again, the big message is we've tried to come up with what we think is most relevant across the value chain, such that anywhere a stakeholder needs support, we have the resources and capabilities on our end to adapt and support. And obviously, where we have capacities that are lacking, we're also very open to working with external consultancies as well to get the job done, because I think ultimately that's the most important thing.
Thank you, Hugo, and my apologies for joining late. My computer decided to have an argument with WebEx, and I had to restart it a couple of times, but I'm so glad that I'm able to join. This was a topic that I was really very eager to hear the panelists, because usually we don't put those two themes together, right? I mean, we talk about energy transitions, we talk about climate change, and then we talk about youth in a very separate space, right? We don't usually connect the two. So I was actually fascinated to learn that your teams, all of you actually, were putting the two agendas together, because you can imagine if energy is going to change, energy is the foundation of the world of work, right? I mean, and if the energy transitions are happening, then obviously they are going to have an implication on the world of work. And obviously that means that the way we equip our youth in terms of their education and skills are also going to need a rethink. But more than that, it's not just the impact of energy transitions on youth. What I'm hearing from some of what you were saying, Hugo, but also some of the work you all panelists have done, it struck me that actually youth can be our biggest ally in this transition. I mean, so many surveys show that youth are actually among the most sort of committed to this, some of these changes that we want to see happening. So anyway, I'm so glad that I'm in and I'm able to hear most of you. So I think let's go to Helen. Helen, thank you for joining us. Helen, I assume that Angelica's already introduced you. You are Senior Director of Partnerships with Student Energy. So over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And so glad to be here. Thank you so much to the World Bank for hosting us and for making space for this conversation. I think for us at Student Energy and of course at SE for All, the SDG7 Youth Constituency as well, very much kind of creating space for these types of conversations is really meaningful for us in a way where we're able to have more kind of intergenerational conversations and conversations about how young people can be supported across different sectors. So definitely kind of acknowledging that this is an important kind of space for us to be in as well. So we appreciate that. And maybe to give a little bit of context to Student Energy before I dive right in. So Student Energy, we're a global youth-led nonprofit organization. We were founded first in 2008, so over 12 years ago, and really kind of around the premise that, a group of young people at the time, a group of students, were really passionate about this idea of talking about the intersection of sustainability and energy systems. And we're starting to get access. Climate change hadn't quite hit the mainstream conversation yet. They were starting to get access to conferences, trying to kind of bring this up in conversation. And we're just really not taken seriously in that space. We're kind of given that pat on the head, sat at the kids' table. And we're, quite frustrated with the fact that they felt they didn't have a platform to speak about, these issues that were important to them in terms of sustainability, energy access, affordability, and all of these different intersections of our energy systems. And so they decided to start this movement where young people around the world who were passionate about the future of sustainable energy could connect. And from there started to roll out different programs and platforms for young people to get access to the different skills, training, tools that they would need to take initiative on these issues in whichever way really was meaningful to them. So whether that's starting a career, whether that's launching education and awareness building programs, whether that's working to kind of influence or shape policy, really making space for that holistic kind of systems-wide approach for young people to be involved. And as we kind of grew over the last several years, we started to dig a little bit deeper into the data around young people and youth engagement on energy to really understand, now in 2022, where are these kind of pervasive gaps that still exist when it comes to young people being able to act? And we saw three kind of core disconnects for our work, or as they kind of related to our work. First and foremost, there was this pervasive communications gap we were seeing. And this one was really interesting to us because I think in particular over the last couple of years, as young people have started mobilizing in greater numbers around the world through climate movements, strikes, protests, online advocacy efforts, there's been this growing awareness and acknowledgement of how kind of loud and powerful young people are as this force calling for greater change. But we saw, looking at the data, that only 50% of young people have ever actually been asked their opinion on the future of energy or climate systems by a government or organization. So there's still this huge disconnect that's happening. Leaders often will refer to young people as these kinds of beacons of hope or this kind of reason for acting on climate change, but aren't necessarily actually being talked to directly. We also saw that almost 3/4 of young people who had attended a climate protest in the past didn't feel like they had a clear pathway forward to creating the change that they wanted to see. So we saw that there's still this door that's being closed at a certain stage of engagement where, and it might be at the policymaking table, it might be when it comes to changing education systems, it depends on how they're looking to act. But, there's still this door that's being closed. Young people may be able to mobilize amongst themselves and with the larger climate community, but ultimately kind of en masse, there's still this kind of barrier to entry that exists. And then last but not least, and I won't kind of harbor on this point too much in this discussion, but we saw that over 82% of young entrepreneurs indicate that a lack of financial support is the main barrier to making energy entrepreneurship feasible for them. And that's particularly we saw around renewable energy and energy access initiatives. And I think it's a fairly unsurprising number just in terms of kind of the barriers to accessing finance kind of at the small scale or medium scale, which young people would be leading projects to start off with in general. But I think young people in particular are quite high risk investments typically. And so this is another issue we're looking to kind of unpack in some of our programming. But I think for the purposes of this conversation, I really wanted to touch a little bit more on the first two kind of aspects of this communication gap and these kind of barriers to entry for young people to be able to act in a way that's meaningful and powerful for them. So to touch a little bit more on the communications gap, this was really the inspiration for the Global Youth Energy Outlook, I would say. As soon as we understood that, young people aren't really being engaged or talked to directly by leaders, we set about to kind of start to understand why that is. And we saw a couple of interesting things. There's a little bit of reluctance or kind of fear to engage young climate activists insofar as there can sometimes be fear that the disruption that they bring to spaces will be counterproductive to kind of the process or kind of ultimate aims of those spaces. And young people also feel quite kind of disillusioned oftentimes by the way that processes are run or honestly just are not provided with the training or capacity building to understand how these processes are undertaken and how they can be kind of a productive kind of member in these spaces as well, kind of speak up for what they care about in ways that will be heard and really kind of incorporated into outcomes from those spaces. And this could be at the policy table, this could be at spaces like COP, lots of different spaces in which this happens. And so we kind of thought critically amongst ourselves, what is a language that often, or what is a tool that's often brought to decision-making spaces, whether this is an intergovernmental decision-making space or a policy-making table? Reports and research and data are often very important tools for underscoring decisions that are being made. We're always looking for more data and evidence to identify the best solutions for moving forward on complex issues. And so what if we put together a report that captures exactly what young people are calling for, recognizing that young people are not a homogenous body, but really looking to capture the kind of core, most powerful insights from this global movement of young people passionate about the energy transition. And we can package this in, this report format that's in this language that's kind of easily understood by anybody, but really kind of makes these concrete calls to action. And so we we decided kind of right at the start, this will need to be a youth-led initiative. This can't just be run by student energy and our kind of staff at our headquarters. We want this to be very much led by young people around the world representing these different regions with very diverse kind of demographics and energy systems, energy needs, and have them really lead the work of engaging their communities and really starting to kind of put together these core takeaways. And so we actually brought on 12 regional coordinators. We have Paula here today, who's one of them, and we'll speak a little bit more to what we saw in the Global Youth Energy Outlook. But we brought on these 12 regional coordinators to engage their communities. And the results were really astonishing. For us, that ended up actually being a really powerful takeaway from the process. It's also a testament to what young people can achieve when provided with this platform to lead on an initiative. Is the regional coordinators ultimately ended up getting 42,000 young people to respond to this survey and engage young people in, I think it was just about 40 community dialogues as well around the world. And so really getting to dive into those niche, kind of more nuanced conversations about complex challenges, paired with more survey-based insights to get the kind of critical mass of data that we were looking for. And that was a really powerful outcome for us because we were like, young people, when provided with the tools and platform, can create something amazing like this. From there, we started to think critically about how we could use this tool as a way to support young people in advocating for their vision for a sustainable energy transition, and started working with different actors in the system to create platforms for the Global Youth Energy Outlook to be kind of heard and used. We're still kind of in the process of this. COP27 will be a big milestone moment for us in actually building out action toolkits for how young people can use the Global Youth Energy Outlook to start conversations with leaders in their communities. And that could be at different scales, whether it's local government, whether it's, at more of an intergovernmental platform, but toolkits for young people. And then on the other side, toolkits for actors in the system to understand how to use the Global Youth Energy Outlook and how to meaningfully engage young people in your work. And that meaningful engagement component is really critical. And I'll speak a little bit more to meaningful youth engagement as kind of one component of the Global Youth Energy Outlook. And Paula will be speaking a little bit more to insights from the Outlook, so don't worry too much on that. So in terms of meaningful youth engagement, this is something that I really am, Student Energy and myself personally, am really looking for as an outcome of where the Global Youth Energy Outlook will go next. I would love to see every organization, institution, start to create these mechanisms for meaningful youth engagement. That can look like a youth advisory council that's directly advising on an organization's climate plan or climate commitments or energy transition plan. That can also look like a mentorship scheme within your organization or outside of your organization. Maybe you're working with organizations like SE for All that has a Women at the Forefront mentorship scheme. There's lots that are out there to kind of build off of, or lots that you can kind of build internally as well to ensure that diverse intergenerational perspectives are being brought into workplaces in a deep and meaningful way. There are also kind of options such as paid apprenticeships, paid internships. These are mechanisms that Student Energy often works with different partners on, where we can kind of bring in knowledge, capacity building, kind of soft skill or practical skill development in young people, paired with institutional knowledge on how that organization or that sector works, so that young people are able to get hands-on practical working experience, which will give them the tools for better engaging with these sectors or accessing careers in the future, while on the flip side, offering that institution opportunities to engage young people, better understand youth values, and what young people are looking for in places where they're engaging. This can also involve having really important and sometimes kind of uncomfortable conversations in your organizations about how you're actively engaging or empowering young people, bringing in tools like the Global Youth Energy Outlook or others. There are many others kind of in the broader climate community as well that exist, but kind of looking to young people to work with on how your organization can follow through on or start to explore how the Global Youth Energy Outlook kind of outcomes can be incorporated in your work, and helping kind of your broader organizational community as well to feel really connected with this idea of meaningful youth engagement and how young people are really being considered in your commitments to climate and energy. And then last and certainly not least, bringing climate and energy into curriculums, educational curriculums around the world I kind of consider that an aspect of meaningful youth engagement, because I do think that particularly on the government side, there's a lot to be done on kind of supporting academia to integrate more kind of 2022 climate and energy content into current academic curriculums to ensure that that's really well incorporated. I think I'm at time, so I will stop there. So sorry, I think I'm a couple minutes over actually. Lots to say on this topic, but happy to answer any questions that anybody has, or pass it over to the next panelist.
Thank you very much, Helen. That was quite inspiring. I mean, clearly, you've highlighted the importance of youth voice, and I mean that's something that's really important. So it's not just voice, but you're also highlighting the fact that that voice needs to go down. It's sort of to the logical conclusion. It's not just enough to engage with them, get their opinion, and then forget about them and go do their own thing. So I think that's a really important thing. But I was also heartened to hear the fact that you've also tried to explicitly connect it to the curriculum, because at the end of the day, how it impacts youth livelihood is the really important aspect of it. And maybe we'll come later towards the end to some questions. But I would love to hear what you heard from youth, actually, in the sense, because I wonder if youth is not a homogeneous group also, right? I mean, were you able to, in your survey, layer the feedback with a socio-economic lens? Because I wonder what a poor young person in some village might say about this, where access to just basic electricity is a challenge and has a direct outcome on their schooling, how much schooling they are able to access, how much nutrition, how much health. I mean, and then further, what sort of livelihood they might be able to afford, where thinking about energy transition sometimes sounds like a luxury to them, when just basic access to electricity is missing. So I wonder what that nuanced sort of socio-economic lens to the youth lens is. But let's come to that towards the end. I just want to hear. I think what Paula is going to say on Latin America is sort of a continuation of what you were saying. So maybe we'll come to a bit of a discussion in the end. But over to you, Paula, for a Latin America lens, I guess.
Hi. So, nice to meet everyone. My name is Paola. I was one of the 12 regional coordinators for the Global Youth Energy Outlook. I will present later some of the results, some of the insights that came after the report and that were really impressive for all of us. And now we are working on our regions based on this data. In my case, how did I started, for example, in the energy world? My story is kind of different from and maybe another ones, because when I was a child, I just lived in the rural areas of my city, and there I saw how were the living conditions of indigenous young people, that there had not internet access, electricity access, so there were less opportunities and many things less in indigenous communities. So since then, I started working on social projects related to climate change. But then I participated in a summer camp some years ago, and there they taught me how important was renewable energy. So I returned to Bolivia and I said, okay, I really need to get into the energy world, but I needed all the energy literacy to go into the activism for energy transition, because that is critical for youth to have energy literacy is crucial, because many of the energy work is critical for knowledge, some technical knowledge, and that things are not taught in neither in school, neither university, if you are not in a renewable energy engineering or something like that. In my country, we don't have that kind of program. So I made student energy, and there I was part of some programs that let me go into dive into all this energy education that I needed to jump into activism. That is critical and that is based for all my region. And of course, being a young woman is even critical, because you don't have the same challenges, you don't have the same opportunities because of many facts. And most of the times, this is also seen in my region. So for sure, another thing that was critical for my region in the energy world is what is meaningful youth engagement, because for sure, for many young people from different parts of the regions and all the world, meaningful youth engagement means different. For my region, what we call meaningful youth engagement is that we could be taken into account in all the processes of the energy transitions, is design of the processes of laws, of anything. So that is for us critical. And then that is my perspective in Latin America. But I would like to jump into sharing some of the insights of the Global Youth Energy Outlook. Okay, I think that I'm sharing. So, could you please let me know if you can see my screen?
You can see it, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry if my voice is cut, but I'm with some sore throat, but I will do my best to do it. Okay. So, some of the data insights of the Global Youth Energy Outlook, as Helen said, around 42,000 young people from 129 countries participated in the Global Youth Energy Outlook. Here are just a few quick global data points that we would like to share from the Global Youth Energy Outlook analysis. 72% of youth surveyed are very concerned or moderately concerned about the pollution and emissions caused by the current global energy system. Around 50% of youth surveyed believe their government needs to invest more in fighting climate change. 81% of youth surveyed believe their country or territory should have a decarbonization target for its energy system. Of these youth, 62% want have a decarbonization target by 2030. So, to summarize, youth are wanting decarbonization targets made faster and quicker in time. They have identified governments needing to be more accountable for climate change action and have named businesses and industry and as key players in taking more responsibility in reducing climate emissions. As such, it is clear that youth are wanting to see change in when, who, and how global climate or clean energy challenges are addressed. To dive into these perspectives a bit further, we'll be looking at some specific research and innovation priorities, as well as youth visions on the future of energy systems in closer detail. First, we asked youth across regions what they saw as the biggest barrier to sustainable energy. 8 of 10 regions listed government, willpower, policies, and regulations as the biggest barrier to sustainable energy transition. In particular, over 50% of youth in Latin America and the Caribbean voted this option. But interestingly, instead of government willpower, policies, and regulations, youth in Africa and East Asia regions voted current energy, industries, and available technology as their biggest barrier to sustainable energy transitions, respectively. In Africa, funding and testing of renewable energy systems is a main contributor to this barrier, whereas in East Asia, this is mostly due to an ongoing strong reliance on hydrocarbon, coal, fossil, and another non-renewable energy sources. Another question we asked youth was to identify what priority actions business and industries should take for climate change action, and it was found that all regions choose lobbying government on decarbonization as a top priority action, and most regions chose creating policies to reduce company emissions as their second priority action, while is committing to becoming carbon neutral or negative as their third priority. Also, another key statistics to point out is the responses for youth vision on future government investment in climate action. While youth across all regions said we need to invest more as the top response, the second most common response were divided between those who were satisfied with current investment versus those who said that we have not invested at all. Latin America, the Caribbean, and Southeast Asian youth were the two regions that said no investment was made at all, highlighting the need for a greater action in those regions. Government investments in these regions are slower or weaker in comparison to the other regions, potentially due to the widespread perceptions that renewable energy is more expensive, and they also face challenges in expanding power generation to meet population growth, as well as improving electricity reliability and accessibility. The government's role in climate change action is also highlighted in another question where we ask youth to identify who is the most responsible to reduce emissions. As shown in this figure on the slide, youths across all regions identified the government as most responsible. This was then followed by businesses and industry and other organizations. However, interesting to note here is that Southeast Asia's third most common response for those who were more responsible to reduce emissions was families, neighborhoods, and communities. A brief analysis shows that emissions at the household level are also greatly considered amongst youth and highlights how youths are considering bottom-up approaches as an alternative to reducing emissions. Is how youth want to fund the energy transition to net zero carbon emissions in their own countries, and implementing a tax on the production of emissions with companies that produce emissions paying this tax was the top chosen response across all regions with 56%. There were some regions where this response was more strongly endorsed than others. For example, in Latin America and the Caribbean, this was the top choice for over 55 of the respondents. To meet its energy needs, each country uses the types of energy available to it in different proportions. This is what we call the energy mix. As you may know and see in the graph that is some old from 2018, the majority of the global energy mix is led by the fossil fuels like oil, coal, and natural gas. And I would like to remember the percentage of renewable energy in this mix that you can see this is fairly 2% of the total. And you can see here the results from the question, how you imagine, sorry, the energy mix in your region by 2030. And of course, it varies from region to region, with the smallest percentage in Middle East and West Asia with 14.6% of renewables, and the biggest percentage in Latin America with 31.2%. So imagine on average, young people globally want the energy mix with 20% of renewable energy. Remember I told you to keep in mind the 2% of the last slide. So it means that we need to grow from the 20% from the 2 to 20% on the energy mix with renewable energy. So it means like 10 times of efforts in policies to promote renewables, 10 times for financing the transition. In general, it means we need to do 10 times what we do now to achieve the energy future that young people dream of. Some of the recommendations that came from the regional dialogues, but also from the experience working on the different energy spaces and that we had as regional coordinators for the Global Youth Energy Outlook and in the GCOM policy innovation team, is that we suggested some of these suggestions. So local governments should realize the potential of youth innovation in technological advancement, but funding and developing youth entrepreneurship and research. This involves supporting startup incubator and accelerator programs and creating team investment calls such as grants or business competitions and hackathons. Also, local research must put youth at the forefront of research and expand participation for young people in developing initiatives to improve the availability of technology. So this can be supported by development of research plans in energy innovations with different stakeholders like academia, governments, industry, young people, where we could work together. Also, local governments should create initiatives and systems to compensate young people for their work on the energy transition and to welcome more young people from diverse backgrounds into the energy and climate space. Another area that we suggested in was about social innovation. It was noted from the Global Youth Energy Outlook that nearly 39% of youth respondents globally feel there are meaningful opportunities for youth to work on sustainable energy issues directly with policymakers in their country or territory. Young people often feel discouraged by harsh top-down governance that do not adequately include local communities in the process. Secondly, also the outlook finds that 13% of youth respondents globally found public or community support as the biggest barrier to achieving sustainable energy transition in their country or territory. In regional dialogue sessions hosted by the regional coordinators, Some youth have mentioned that their knowledge on climate change and action mostly comes from a variety of informal sources rather than the formal education systems. That was what I talking and sharing before with you with my experience. As also, it is critical for cities to support holistic climate education and literacy to empower all generations with the skills, knowledge, and values, also embedding indigenous and local knowledge to encourage climate action. Um, Also, last but not least, having uh, open source data can bridge the knowledge gap associated with low community support. To summarize, local governments need to create the enable environment for climate and clean energy action. Young people identify government policy and willpower as the biggest barrier in the energy transition. Young people see a path forward. They are hopeful that the opportunity to participate in the transition is greater in the coming years. A quarter of young people believe there are meaningful opportunities to work with policymakers on the energy transition, as well as with business, but need support to see a path forward and feel their perspectives are valued. Young people believe that industries plays a huge role in funding the transition, as respondents believe that companies that are producing emissions need to be the ones to contribute to taxes on those emissions. Industry needs to demonstrate leadership on decarbonization by actively advocating for emission reductions internally with governments. So these were some of the takeaways that we had from the Global Youth Energy Outlook that we wanted to share with you. But I could we are open to have your questions about all the results that we had, or in general what we did. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you so much, Paula, and really remarkable how you took your activism to heart. And thank you so much also for sharing the key insights from your survey. And I guess I would be really interested in understanding a little more the methodology that you used for your survey. Who were the youth that you reached out? How did you reach out to them? Were they university students? Were they uh, college students? I mean, so just a little bit more. But before we come to that, I just want to also turn to my colleague Ulrike there. Welcome, Ulrike, who's recently joined the World Bank, actually, and she's going to be working in the jobs group precisely on the topic that we are talking about, which is the connection between energy and jobs. She's just recently joined. She's still sort of thinking about the framework. But before she joined the World Bank, she worked with IRENA, which I think a lot of you know is the Renewable Energy Agency. So over to you, Ulrike.
Thank you, Namita, and thank you for drafting me in, although on short notice, but I'm really happy to be here. And that just connects to a lot of topics that lie not only at the heart of my work, but also at the heart of basically at my heart, which is really something that I'm happy to talk about. But as you said, I only recently joined, so I apologize in advance for maybe being a bit too general. I could be much more explicit and project oriented if we meet like half a year from now. Then I'm all gonna join a much more focused discussion. Now, when we think about energy and jobs today, I mean, energy and jobs, as Namita already has said, are at the heart of development, right? Energy supports our basic needs, supports also developing productive goods and services to create more and better jobs. And that's what the jobs group is all about, trying to support the creation of more and better jobs. Because good jobs, of course, are the surest pathway out of poverty. Currently, when we focus on the energy sector, globally, close to 46 million people work in mining and quarrying, electricity, gas, and water supply. That's the very narrow focus of the traditional, as of yet, energy sector. But of course, energy enables many more jobs in industry, in agriculture, in transport, or in retail. And as somebody has said earlier on this panel, health, security, and education, of course, often hinge crucially on access to clean, reliable, and affordable energy. And so, of course, also do the jobs in this sector. So to meet the challenges of the future, the global energy agenda is about to change. We all know that. Electricity becomes more and more relevant. Also to ensure access to information, but also to decarbonize end uses, for instance, in mobility or in the industrial sectors that have been mentioned earlier, and to replace the greenhouse gas emitting energy uses in the economy. By the way, when we saw the slide about the energy mix, the picture with regards to electricity generation is not as gloomy as the picture with regards to overall energy use. So renewables actually have a much larger share in electricity generation, and they definitely have overtaken the fossil fuels in capacity expansion and that's very important, in investment. So we've seen year after year the investment in new capacities in renewables is, I don't know, has been outpacing the investment in fossils, I think, 4 times. So it's really, really high. The renewable energy sector alone currently provides around 12 million jobs globally. And energy efficiency, that's always the kind of forgotten stepdaughter of the whole picture, right? I mean, energy efficiency jobs are not as systematically accounted for, but of course they come on top of that. Now, when we talk about access and jobs, at the same time, too many people, of course, are without access to electricity or clean cooking. And I'm so happy that clean cooking has been mentioned before, because that demands lives and deprives people of their employment opportunities. Energy access and access to clean cooking not only have direct effects on jobs and well-being, but of course also contribute indirectly to the production of income or value. Small businesses, new services can develop. And freeing time, of course, energy access can lead to improved incomes with a shift from non-wage labor to income-generating labor, especially for women. And talking about women, I really compliment the organizers of this panel, of the almost unbalanced panel with regards to gender. I hope Hugo feels well in this group of women, but having been in energy economics for like 30 years, Hugo, I was in your role the other way around for, I think, 20 years of my professional life. So this is really, really a change. Back to the topic, decentralized systems based on renewables are currently widely discussed, still in the framework of energy access and jobs. But of course, they are often not as widely implemented to improve energy access, in particular in areas where population is sparse, in rural areas, and where the grid expansion and the grid connection is lacking. World Bank research has shown that mini grids can economically supply electricity to people in areas where the main grid is unlikely to reach soon. Mini grids are increasingly price competitive against traditional sources. So there's no need for the diesel genset if you have the solar-driven mini grid. And the risk of stranded investment is low, in particular if the mini grid is designed in grid-ready state and grid-ready standard manner. And from the jobs perspective, involving the respective communities. And I think Paola has said something, or one of the outcomes of the survey was also that involving the respective communities is, of course, really essential, including the local workforce and providing training and installation and operation and maintenance of the respective system, because that is essential to maintain direct value creation and jobs. Now, youth energy and the jobs in the future. Of course, when we speak about youth, it's much more easy to also, or we have to speak about the future. My own future is much shorter than for instance, Paola's. So the new energy agenda needs and provides innovation for opportunities for innovation and for new services, new insights, ideas, and jobs. The installation of renewable energy and energy efficiency technologies requires new sets of vocational skills, of manual dexterity, and of social skills, because operating and maintenance much further involves going to people's homes than operating large power plants. So the whole skill set is also, the skill set that we need for the future might be a bit different in the energy sector. Today's youth will be increasingly facing the damages of climate change, of course. You all know that. I mean, it leads to severe loss of jobs in several sectors, not only in energy, but it leads to lost jobs in agriculture, by salination of fields, by droughts, by heat-related yield losses, in industry, because losses follow extreme events, and in services. For instance, losses in returns from tourism, following loss of natural landscape, higher risk of wildfires or heat waves. And all of us know that developing countries are the most vulnerable to these damages. And energy efficiency, the energy transition, and of course, adaptation activities have to be and will be an important source of income and employment for young people in the future. Now, you cannot talk about any energy transition without mentioning the just transition issue and jobs. So to avoid frictions under the global energy agenda, skills development, capacity building in the energy sector need to be aligned with the requirements of the future energy system. In a recent World Bank report, we have shown that the total number of workers directly engaged in coal and lignite mining is currently 4.7 million. Remember what I said earlier? 12 million in renewables, 47 in the whole sector, accounting for a small and declining share of total employment, even in the major coal-producing countries. That's mainly due to productivity gains. Over 2 million coal mining jobs have been lost in the last decade. And workforce analysis of median age in the US, for instance, suggests that the median age of the mining workforce is rising much more rapidly than for the overall US civilian labor workforce. And that, of course, has implications for the transition. So when young people do enter the sector, and it's still, I mean, we have to face it, it's still attractive in terms of, in terms of wages you can earn, in terms of the whole labor situation. So when young people do enter the sector, to facilitate that transition, their training could ensure or should ensure that the acquired skill set is transferable to other sectors of the new energy agenda to avoid mismatch under the energy transition. And to end with a small advertising break, the Jobs Group is currently working on its new Jobs flagship, where also the importance of youth as a global and cross-cutting theme and as a driver of innovation and change will be addressed. So stay tuned. Back to you, Namita.
Thank you so much, Ulrike, for a very sort of balanced, very nuanced set of comments on an agenda that's actually enormously complicated. I mean, I think from your remarks, it struck me that, some of the findings that your survey shows, for example, Paula and Helen, is that the reluctance that we see on the parts of government sometimes. We may see it as reluctance, but actually it might sometimes show just the deep trade-offs that policymakers need to make. Usually when you argue about an energy transition, sometimes it's perceived by policymakers as foregoing possible economic development and creation of jobs, which is just politically very difficult to argue for. And so I think that, just based on what Ulrike said, if we were to very consciously put forward a capacity building agenda where we are very consciously talking about preparing the future generations with the right skills for a future energy mix, and also, what you said, Ulrike, about mapping opportunities in the value chain, like installation jobs, maintenance jobs, then suddenly this becomes a possible opportunity rather than just a possible avenue where a government or a country might lose jobs in the process of shifting to a more sort of environment-friendly energy option. So actually in our jobs group, what we think is that when you embed the jobs agenda in the energy transition agenda or the green agenda, you actually make the green agenda stronger because you address the biggest constraint or the biggest, what should I say, concern that policymakers have, which is why your survey shows how young people think that their governments aren't just acting enough. And maybe that's part of the problem, but a lot of it is also showing us that governments share very serious concerns they actually have concerns about what would this mean for their future economic growth, particularly countries that still have to catch up in terms of economic development. So really thoughtful remarks there, Ulrike. Thank you so much. I know that we have 2 minutes left, and I shouldn't have hogged the last few minutes just talking about what I think. But back to the panelists, actually, if you want to just come in, just say a little bit about your survey methodology. Perhaps also, I wonder if you could share a bit about what new ideas are you finding when you talk to young people? Are there any innovative solutions? Because Paula, you said that Africa, one of the biggest constraints that people felt they had was just available technology. They just don't have the right technology. Are you seeing any youth-led solutions in this space? I'm just back to the panelists. Anybody who wants to respond. Ugo, Paula, or Helen, anyone. And then anyone who wants to put in a quick question in the chat function, please feel free to do so.
I know there was a quick question on methodology, so maybe I'll touch on that one really quickly. And I have a list of some amazing kind of youth stories from our fellowship that I'll pop in the chat. But I would love to hear from my fellow panelists on more initiatives or innovative solutions we're seeing. So one quick note on the methodology, a really important aspect of our surveying method from the get-go was ensuring that we had a proportional representation of youth from rural and remote communities as well as from urban communities. And that was something that we kind of built in a whole set of principles from the get-go, worked with the regional coordinators on this as well to identify, what is our gender balance goals, which we had a 50-50 gender balance goal. And for the most part, I think we stayed on track there. And we had the demographics goals around rural and urban representation, which I think if you go on the Global Youth Energy Outlook page and click on any of the regions, there's a little bubble that will pop up and it will let you know what the gender breakdown was, what the urban rural breakdown was. And I think at the lowest level, the rural representation in our surveying was at 10% of total surveyed. But in the regions where there was the highest number of rural representation, I think we were closer to 23% of surveyed youth were identifying as being in rural regions. And we had a priority as well to ensure that there were youth participating who were outside of kind of traditional academic systems, also outside of traditional energy or STEM kind of curriculum. So young people who were kind of maybe in the climate community, maybe even outside of the climate community, but really that kind of balanced representation of youth who aren't necessarily super kind of gung-ho about energy transition stuff, but are really kind of speaking from where they stand, which is why I think some of the insights around kind of future energy mixes and things like that were almost like a little bit surprising to us because we're so in our own energy transition bubble at student energy. So that was a big priority for us, and we wanted to achieve about 5,000 responses per the 10 distinct regions that we broke down. So I think, yeah, I'll pause there because I think I'm happy to speak also offline more about the methodology. But we worked with some of our partners as well who, research institutions who had great kind of advice for us in setting that up. But maybe I'll pass it over to my fellow panelists.
Yeah, no, thank you, Helen. And I know that we've almost run out of time, but I don't want to miss this question that we just got, which is a good question. How do we make sure that all of this innovation and that we don't risk leaving people behind in this transition? So any just quick, like 30-second thoughts on this?
Yeah, maybe I will jump into that. And I think that innovation, leaving no one behind, needs to take, especially in the energy sector, three perspectives: youth, gender, and indigenous perspective. Why? Because youth are crucial as stakeholders in all the energy innovation that you could have. Second, gender, because most of the times young women and girls are the most the most affected by climate change issues or not having access to electricity or even health services. And then indigenous, why? Because most of the times you need to talk when you are working in research and innovation in future technologies, you need to jump into the local knowledge, the indigenous and transcendental knowledge that comes up, and innovation will be greater if you take these three spheres inside your research and what you are working on. Why I say this? Because I'm descendant of indigenous communities, and I know that innovation needs to be quite radical and open to different points of view, and it's first to be for everyone in this kind of innovation, you know. That's one
Thanks.
maybe another of my fellows want to share something more.
Yeah, no, I think that we've probably run out of time, but thank you, Paula, for sharing those thoughts. Just a big thank you to our wonderful panelists, Hugo, Helen, Paula, Ulrike, for this very rich discussion on a topic which is so interesting and so current, and actually so complex. And some of the insights that you all shared just proves the point. So I think that we might even want to do another session, maybe a few months down the line, just building on some of these remarks. There's a lot more to unpack here. So thank you all. And just a quick reminder that we usually, whenever we have these webinars, they are also simultaneously on Facebook, but we will share the recording. A lot of our colleagues say that they are not able to join sometimes because of another meeting, but they want to see the recording. So we'll put it on our website. Just give us like half a day. By tomorrow, I think it should be on our website. And we'll also post, if you don't mind, Paula, the slides you shared. So we'll also post them on our website. People can see the wonderful work you did. So thank you very much to our wonderful panelists, and thank you all for joining. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Angelica. Thank you, Namita. And thank you, my fellow panelists.
Nice to meet you.
See you all soon.